Kevin Martinez stood in the cold corridor of Station Kepler 7, watching the 12 alien cadets move past him with expressions that mixed curiosity and clear disrespect. They did not hide their feelings. Why would they? They came from civilizations that had conquered the stars when humans were still learning to farm on their small, dangerous world. To them, Kevin was not a warrior. He was not even a proper soldier. He was a curiosity, a weak thing from a death world that should never have been allowed inside their training facility. The Dacian cadets moved first, their forearms swinging with natural grace. They were tall and powerful, their bodies built for strength and speed. Their commander, a male named Vexral, looked directly at Kevin and did not look away. It was not a look of respect. It was a look that said Kevin did not belong here, that his presence was an insult to the Academy and everything it stood for. Then came the Corellians. Their bodies made of a material that looked almost like crystal but moved like muscle. They had bodies that could heal almost anything. They were nearly impossible to break. They had survived in a universe that killed weaker species. To them, Kevin's soft human body seemed like a joke. The Vextari came next, their large eyes glowing faintly in the station's artificial light. They were telepathic beings, their minds connected to networks that spanned entire star systems. They could communicate across planets without machines. They could feel the thoughts of others. When they looked at Kevin, they saw his fear clearly. They saw his doubt. And they found it pathetic. Kevin said nothing. He had learned on Earth that sometimes silence was stronger than words. He had learned that humans were good at waiting, at observing, at understanding what others wanted to hear. But he did not say these things to the aliens. He simply stood and waited. The Academy instructor, a tall being called Vexal from a species that had existed for over 2 million years, arrived at the testing chamber entrance. She had neural structures that made her faster and smarter than most creatures in the known galaxy. She had come to oversee the Sovereign Endurance Trial, a test that no human had ever attempted before. The trial was ancient and simple. Cadets would enter a sealed chamber where temperature, gravity, sound, and light would change constantly and without warning. The chamber would push a cadet's body and mind to the breaking point. The record for survival was 23 hours, set by Commander Zith, a Corellian who had pushed his body beyond normal limits. No one had beaten that record in 100 years. No one had even come close. Vexal looked at Kevin with something that might have been pity. She explained the rules in a voice that was perfectly calm and neutral. The trial would end when a cadet physically collapsed, or when a cadet used the emergency signal to request extraction. There were no other ways out. A cadet could not fake their way through the test. Their bodies would tell the truth. Their vital signs, their muscle reactions, their brain patterns, everything would be recorded and measured. Do you understand? Vexal asked Kevin in the common trade language. I understand, Kevin said. His voice was steady. He had trained for this moment for over a year. He had come to this alien station knowing he was the first human ever to try this test. He had come knowing that his species was seen as weak and fragile. But Kevin was not weak. He was from Earth, a world where the sun burned hot, where storms killed without mercy, where predators were faster and stronger and smarter. Humans had survived Earth. That meant humans could survive almost anything. The other cadets filed into the observation room. They had come to watch Kevin fail. They had come to see how quickly a human would break under pressure. Some of them were taking wagers on how long Kevin would last. The Leshan commander, Vexral, had told others that Kevin would not last more than 2 hours. Kevin walked into the testing chamber. The door sealed behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. The walls were gray and smooth. There was nothing to grab. There was nowhere to sit. There was only empty space and the knowledge that the test was about to begin. the environmental systems activated. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then gravity shifted. The force pressing down on Kevin's body increased from normal Earth gravity to 3 times normal. His legs felt heavy. His spine felt compressed. The air itself seemed to become thicker and harder to breathe. Kevin breathed through it. He had trained in high-gravity environments for months. He had learned how his body would respond. He shifted his weight and found balance. Then, the temperature spiked. The chamber became hot, so hot that Kevin's skin immediately began to sweat. The moisture on his body evaporated almost instantly. His throat became dry. But Kevin breathed slowly and deeply. Humans were animals of adaptation. Humans had lived in deserts and ice fields. Humans had survived extremes that should have killed them. The sound came next. It was not music or noise. It was a frequency that seemed to bypass his ears and attack his brain directly. It created a pressure in his skull, a feeling like his head was expanding. Kevin closed his eyes and accepted the sensation. Pain was information. Pain was the body's way of saying something was wrong. But Kevin's mind could process that information and move past it. The light changed rapidly, flashing in patterns that seemed designed to confuse and disorient. Kevin kept his eyes closed. He did not need to see. He needed to feel his body and know where he was in space. Inside the observation room, the alien cadets watched the readings with expressions that shifted from confidence to concern. The human was not falling apart. By hour 2, Vexral's certainty had begun to crack. By hour 4, the Dacian commander was no longer smiling. Hour 6 arrived. The first cadet to break was one of the Carillions. His crystalline structure, normally so strong, began to vibrate at frequencies that damaged his body from the inside. He used the emergency signal and was extracted from the chamber. His body was shaking uncontrollably. The Vextari came next. Their telepathic minds, so connected to vast networks of information, could not handle the sensory attack. The chaos of the trial broke something in their consciousness. A female Vextari named Shania collapsed and had to be removed on a medical platform. One by one, the alien cadets fell. Each one believed they had performed well. Each one had surpassed the Academy's minimum requirement of 4 hours. But none of them realized that Kevin was still standing in the observation room. Vexal watched the monitors showing Kevin's vital signs. His heart rate was elevated. His muscles showed fatigue. But he was still breathing. He was still conscious. He was still standing in the center of that chamber, enduring with 12 cadets, each one stronger and faster and more advanced than him, could not endure, and he was still smiling. Hour 12 came and Kevin Martinez had not stopped. The human's body was screaming in ways that should have forced him to surrender long ago. His muscles ached as though they were being torn apart piece by piece. His joints felt filled with fire and sand mixed together. Every breath he took sent sharp pain through his chest. But Kevin kept breathing. Kevin kept standing in the observation room. Instructor Vexal stood motionless in front of the monitoring system. She had trained cadets for 40 years. She had seen species from across the galaxy push their bodies to extreme limits. She had watched the strongest beings in existence reach their breaking points. But she had never seen anything like this. The human should have failed. According to every medical database in the Galactic Alliance, human physiology should have begun complete system failure by hour 4. Humans had weak skeletons. Humans had soft bodies. Humans had brains that were too small and organs that were too fragile. When compared to other intelligent species in the galaxy, humans ranked near the bottom in almost every physical measure. Yet Kevin had now survived longer than any cadet currently in the Academy. Vexal turned to her superior officer, a being named Kethara from a species that had perfected their biology through genetic engineering for 3 million years. Cathora stood with arms crossed, her expression showing confusion mixed with something that might have been respect. "This is not possible," Vexal said. "The human's vital signs show extreme stress. His body is beginning to consume its own muscle tissue for energy. His organs are operating on backup systems that should have depleted hours ago. How is he still conscious?" Cathara did not answer immediately. She continued watching the monitoring screens. Kevin's body appeared on the display, showing a heat map of his internal temperature, his blood pressure, his heart rate. All of these readings were in the danger zone. All of these readings said the human should be dead. But Kevin was not dead. Kevin was adapting inside the chamber. Kevin had entered a state that was almost like a dream. The pain was still there, but it had become something separate from him, something he observed rather than experienced. This was what billions of years of survival on Earth had taught humanity. Humans did not have the strongest bodies. Humans did not have the fastest reflexes or the sharpest senses. But humans had something else. Humans could endure. When gravity shifted violently, throwing his body off balance, Kevin adjusted his center of mass. He had spent his life on a world where gravity was constant and strong. His bones were thick and dense. His muscles were made for carrying weight and pushing through resistance. The Deshans were built for speed. The Carillions were built for durability. But humans were built for long distance. Humans were built for suffering. When the temperature spiked again, Kevin's body responded with biological systems that the alien instructors had not fully understood. His skin turned red as blood rushed to the surface. Sweat poured from his body, covering his skin with moisture that evaporated and cooled him through the most basic science. It was not elegant. It was not advanced. But it worked. Hour 18 arrived. The chamber's intensity increased. The gravity changed so rapidly that anyone standing would have fallen. Kevin fell to one knee, and in the observation room, several instructors leaned forward in their seats. This was it. This was the moment when the human would finally use the emergency signal and end the trial. Kevin did not use the signal. Instead, he pushed himself back to his feet. It took him 15 seconds. In those 15 seconds, his legs refused to obey his commands. His muscles were so depleted that they could barely respond. But Kevin had been a soldier on Earth, trained in difficult conditions, trained to keep moving even when movement seemed impossible. He had run through desert heat and through cold mountain snow. He had pushed his body beyond what he thought possible, and he did it again. By hour 24, Kevin had now surpassed the Academy record. Commander Zith's 23-hour record had been broken by a human, a creature from a death world that the galaxy had written off as weak and inferior. The revelation sent pressure waves through the Academy. News began spreading through the station's communication systems. Other instructors arrived to watch the monitoring screens. Military officers started asking questions. This was not supposed to be happening. Kevin's body was beginning to fail in ways that were more serious than mere pain and muscle fatigue. His organs were under extreme stress. His liver was struggling to process the toxins his body was creating. His kidneys were working at maximum capacity. His heart was beating at a rate that should have caused it to stop long ago. But something inside Kevin refused to accept defeat. It was not logic. It was not rational thinking. It was something deeper, something written in his genetics and his culture and his training. It was the voice of his ancestors, the humans who had hunted across frozen plains, who had crossed oceans in fragile boats, who had survived ice ages and famines and plagues and wars. Something in Kevin's DNA said that survival was possible if you were willing to endure long enough. Around hour 28, Kevin's body began shutting down systems that were not immediately necessary for survival. His vision started to narrow at the edges. Colors became less bright. Sounds became distant and faint. But his core systems remained active. His heart kept beating. His lungs kept breathing. His mind kept thinking. The alien cadets in the observation room had stopped talking. Vexral, the Theshan commander who had been so certain of Kevin's quick failure, watched in silence. Cathar, a Theshan female, turned to the others and made a statement that reflected what all of them were thinking. She said, "This should not be possible. Humans are supposed to be weak." But the human in the chamber was not weak. The human was something that their training had not prepared them to understand. The human was enduring beyond logic, continuing past the point where any reasonable being would surrender. Vexal made a note in the official record. She wrote that at hour 28 the human cadet was still standing. His vital signs remained critical. His body was operating on systems that should have stopped functioning hours ago. But he was still conscious. He was still breathing. He was still smiling that small, strange smile that seemed to say he understood. Something about pain and endurance that the aliens could not. Kevin did not know that he was smiling. He was beyond the point where he could feel his own face or understand his own expression. He existed in a space that was barely conscious, where the only thing that mattered was the next breath, the next heartbeat, the next moment of continued existence. Hour 30 approached, and the Galactic Academy prepared for a moment that would change how the entire universe understood human beings. Hour 40 came without warning. Kevin Martinez no longer tracked time. Time had become meaningless. There was only the present moment, only the next breath, only the choice to continue standing or to fall. But he did not fall. His mind had entered a strange place that was somewhere between consciousness and something else. It was a place where pain became abstract, where exhaustion became a background noise rather than an urgent signal. In this twilight state, Kevin's thoughts drifted. He thought of Earth, his home world with its oceans and mountains and forests. He thought of rain falling on his face. He thought of wind moving through trees. He thought of his family waiting back on that small blue world for him to return with honor. These thoughts were not random. They were tools his mind was using to survive. The human brain was powerful in ways that other species often underestimated. When the body reached extreme limits, the mind could override physical signals. The mind could convince the body to continue when surrender seemed logical. This was a human gift. This was something that came from millions of years of struggling to survive on a planet that tried to kill its inhabitants in every possible way. In the observation room, a crisis was developing. Kevin's heart rate had become dangerously irregular. The rhythm on the monitoring screen showed patterns that should have indicated a heart attack. His blood pressure was so low that his brain should have stopped receiving oxygen. The medical systems in the chamber began issuing warnings. The safety protocols were preparing to extract him immediately and place him in emergency medical care. Vexal watched the indicators and made a decision that was not standard procedure. She contacted Kevin directly through the communication system in the chamber. She wanted to give him the chance to end the trial voluntarily. No shame would attach to him if he chose extraction. He had already broken the record. He had already proven something that no one expected to be proven. But Kevin did not respond to her words. When his eyes opened, when his gaze turned toward the observation window, there was something in his expression that stopped Vexal from issuing the extraction order. Kevin was looking directly at her, and his small smile was still there. His expression said something clear and powerful. It said that he would not accept help. It said that he would decide when the trial ended. Not the Academy, not the machines, not anyone else but Kevin himself. The medical team was ready to override the safety protocols and extract him by force. But Vexal stepped forward and stopped them. She made a command decision that would later be questioned by the Academy administration. She said to let the human continue if his body could continue. She said that to extract him against his will would be to deny him something that seemed to matter more than survival itself. It would be to deny him the right to prove what humans were truly capable of. Something in that moment, something in the gesture of respect that Vexal showed, changed the way the alien cadets understood strength. Strength was not just about superior biology. Strength was also about choice and will, and the refusal to break under pressure. Hour 45 arrived. Kevin's body had moved into a stage of physical breakdown that seemed irreversible. His muscles had begun consuming themselves for energy and fuel. His body temperature was fluctuating in dangerous patterns. The bones in his legs were beginning to show signs of stress fractures. Every system in his body was failing, but failing slowly, managing to continue operating just barely long enough for him to take one more breath and stand for one more moment. Kythar, the Veshan cadet, requested permission to leave the observation room. She had seen enough. She did not want to watch a human being destroy his own body in pursuit of something that she was beginning to understand. She was beginning to understand that respect was not something you were born with. Respect was something you had to witness. Respect was something you earned through action. Hour 50 arrived like a dream that was too strange to be real. Kevin was no longer entirely present in the chamber. His consciousness had fractured into multiple layers. Part of him was experiencing the pain and the exhaustion and the desperate fight to keep standing. Another part of him had somehow escaped into memory and imagination. He was walking through a forest on Earth. He could feel the ground beneath his feet. He could smell the trees and the rain and the earth. But he was also in the chamber. His body was still upright. His heart was still beating, though the rhythm was becoming more and more irregular. His lungs were still taking in air, though each breath was shallow and struggled. Around hour 51, the medical system issued a critical alert. Kevin's heart rate had become so irregular that a medical emergency seemed certain. The safety systems made a final attempt to extract him. The chamber's emergency protocols activated, and the emergency signal was triggered automatically by the machines that surrounded him. The floor beneath his feet began to shift, preparing to eject him upward through the extraction tunnel. But Kevin's voice, weak and barely audible through the communication system, made a sound. It might have been a word. It might have been only a sound of refusal. But it was enough. Veshel, watching the readings and listening to that sound, made another decision that would change everything. She manually overrode the automatic extraction system. She kept the chamber active. She let the human continue. And in that moment, something shifted in the academy. The alien cadets stopped seeing Kevin as weak. They started seeing him as something they had never encountered before. They saw a creature that could not be broken by pain, that could not be defeated by superior technology or superior biology. They saw a being that could continue when all logic said to stop. Hour 52 came with the station's morning cycle. The external solar panels rotated to face the system star, and light began filling the observation windows. Kevin's body was still standing. It was barely standing. It was standing only because of his will, because of the choice to continue, because of something so deep in his genetics and his culture that it could not be denied. The alien cadets watched that human stand and smile, and they began to understand what their instructors had never fully explained. Strength was not the absence of pain. Strength was the ability to continue in the presence of pain. Strength was the refusal to break. Strength was human. And Kevin Martinez had proven that strength existed in his species in a way that no amount of training could have shown them. Hour 52 and 30 minutes came and went. Kevin Martinez remained standing in the chamber, still conscious, still breathing, still enduring. His body was operating on systems that medical science said should have failed long ago. His organs were shutting down one by one, but they were doing it slowly enough that he remained alive. His muscles could barely hold him upright, but they held. His mind was barely functional, but it kept the basic commands flowing to his body. Keep standing. Keep breathing. Do not fall. The Academy's medical staff had gathered in the observation room. They had brought scanners and monitoring equipment. They were taking detailed measurements of Kevin's condition because they knew they would never see anything like this again. A human had endured for over 52 hours in a chamber designed to break. Even the strongest beings in the galaxy. Around hour 53, Vexal made the decision to end the trial voluntarily. It was not because Kevin had asked for it. Kevin would never ask for it. Kevin would stand until his body literally could no longer support him. But Vexal had made a judgment call. She had decided that the human had proven what needed to be proven. The test was not about how much pain could be endured. The test was about character and will and the ability to continue when logic said to stop. Kevin had demonstrated all of these things beyond any doubt. The extraction process was careful and gentle. Kevin's body was too fragile now to handle harsh treatment. Medical robots carefully guided him upward through the extraction tunnel. They supported his weight as he moved, because his legs could no longer carry him. His muscles had been pushed beyond the point of recovery. As Kevin emerged from the chamber, the observation room fell completely silent. The alien cadets who had watched him for the entire duration of the trial stared at the human who was being lowered onto a medical platform. They expected him to collapse immediately. They expected him to lose consciousness. They expected him to appear broken. Instead, Kevin opened his eyes and looked directly at them. That small smile was still there on his face, weak and barely visible, but still present. It was not a smile of triumph. It was not a smile of arrogance. It was a smile that said he understood something about what he had just accomplished. It was a smile that said pain was temporary, but will was eternal. The medical team rushed forward with equipment designed to stabilize his condition. His body temperature was dangerously high and dropping rapidly. His heart rhythm was chaotic. His blood pressure was far too low. His organs were shutting down from exhaustion and stress. He was suffering from multiple forms of shock. He was, by any reasonable measure, a human being who should not be alive. But he was alive. And he was conscious enough to be aware of what was happening around him. Cathar was the first cadet to move toward Kevin, the Theshan female, who would question the very idea of humans being weak. Approached the medical platform with an expression that the translation system struggled to classify. It was not sympathy. It was not pity. It was something much more profound. It was recognition. It was acknowledgement that she had been wrong about something fundamental. Other cadets followed. The Carillion, who had been among the first to collapse, approached and stood quietly near Kevin. The Vexthari, who had failed at hour 6, was there as well, her telepathic senses reaching toward Kevin, trying to understand how his mind had endured what her own mind could not. Vexal stood at the edge of the group. She had overseen the Sovereign Endurance trial for 40 years. She had watched hundreds of cadets push their bodies to the limit, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what she had just witnessed. Nothing in her training had explained how a human, a supposedly inferior species, could endure what beings with superior biology could not. The medical systems reported that Kevin's condition was stabilizing, though only barely. His heart rate was still irregular. His organs were still under extreme stress. But the immediate danger of death appeared to have passed. His body, that soft and fragile human body, had survived something that should have killed it multiple times over. As the medical team worked on Kevin, he managed to speak. His voice was barely above a whisper, damaged from hours of breathing through pain and exhaustion. He looked at Cathar and the other cadets and said words that will be recorded and transmitted throughout the Academy and beyond. You trained, he said slowly. You showed discipline. You showed courage. But you do not know what it is to refuse to break. I come from Earth. On Earth, nothing comes easy. The sun burns hot. The cold burns cold. The weather kills without mercy. The animals are faster and stronger and smarter than we are. We humans are not the strongest. We are not the fastest. We are not the smartest. But we endure. We continue. We keep going when every signal in our body tells us to stop. This is not special to me. This is human. This is what my species does. Keitha listened to these words, and something changed in her understanding. She had spent her entire life believing that strength came from superior biology. She had believed that advanced genetics determined superiority. But Kevin had proven something different. He had proven that strength could come from choice. Strength could come from will. Strength could come from refusing to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed inevitable. Over the next hours, Kevin was moved to the medical center. His body required constant monitoring and careful treatment. The doctors had to repair damage to his muscles and organs. They had to bring his temperature down to normal ranges. They had to restore his fluid levels and his electrolyte balance. They had to stabilize a body that was barely alive, but Kevin recovered. His human biology, the same biology that had evolved to survive on a death world, proved to be remarkably good at healing. Within a week, he was conscious and aware. Within 2 weeks, he could sit up and take nourishment. Within a month, he was walking short distances with medical support done, and the entire academy knew his name. Word had spread to every military station in the sector. The human cadet who had broken the endurance record. The human cadet who had surpassed every alien species in the academy in a test designed to measure will and determination. The human cadet who had forced the galaxy to reconsider what weakness really meant and what strength really was. Instructors from across the station requested transfers to work with human cadets. Military commanders wanted to know more about human capabilities. Scientists just wanted to study human physiology and understand how humans could do something that their biological limitations should have prevented them from doing. But Kevin knew the truth. There was no special science. There was no hidden genetics. Humans were just good at continuing. Humans had been doing it on Earth for millions of years, and they would keep doing it wherever they went. 3 months later, Kevin Martinez stood on the observation deck of a military transport ship, watching Station Kepler-7 fade into the distance. His body had healed, though the scars remained. There were places inside his muscles that would never be quite the same. There were parts of his body that had been damaged and repaired so many times that they would probably never be completely normal again. But he was alive. He was whole. And most importantly, he had changed something fundamental in the galaxy. The Galactic Council had convened within days of Kevin's trial ending. The question was not whether he had won. The question was what his victory meant for humanity's place in the wider universe. For years, humans had been welcomed into the Galactic Alliance with a kind of patronizing acceptance. They were tolerated. They were allowed to participate. But they had not been truly respected. They had been seen as a species that was useful for certain roles, but ultimately limited by their basic biology. That understanding had changed completely. Military officers throughout the sector had begun requesting human recruits for their training programs. They wanted to understand human potential. They wanted to study how a species could accomplish things that their biology should have prevented them from accomplishing. They wanted to take the lessons that Kevin had taught them and apply those lessons to their own training and their own development. The Deshan military commander who had bet against Kevin had publicly acknowledged his error. Vexral stood before the Academy Assembly and stated that he had been wrong. He had believed that physical superiority determined military superiority, but Kevin had shown that this belief was false. Vexral had requested to be reassigned to work with human trainees, to learn from them the way they had to learn from him. The Dacian cadet, who had been the first to recognize what Kevin had accomplished, had become an advocate for human recruitment throughout the galaxy. She traveled to different worlds and spoke to different species about the trial. She told them about standing in that observation room and watching a being with supposedly inferior biology refuse to break under pressure that should have broken anyone. "We thought we understood strength," Cathar would say in these presentations. "We thought strength came from powerful muscles and advanced biology. But this human showed us that strength is also about choice. Strength is also about will. Strength is about continuing when every instinct tells you to stop. This is something humans know. This is something that comes from their world." News of Kevin's accomplishment had reached Earth through official Galactic Alliance channels. His family had received notification that he was safe and that he had completed his academy training with distinction. But they had not received the full details of what had happened in that test chamber. They did not know that their son and brother had endured for 52 hours. They did not know that he had broken a record that had stood for 100 years. They did not know that he had changed the way alien species understood human beings. Kevin had requested leave to return home to Earth before his formal posting to a military vessel. The leave had been approved, along with a promotion to officer rank. He was being offered positions aboard some of the most advanced ships in the Galactic Alliance. He was being offered command roles. He was being offered opportunities that would have been unthinkable for a human 6 months earlier, but Kevin's primary focus was simply being human again. He wanted to walk on Earth. He wanted to feel rain on his skin. He wanted to taste food from his home world. He wanted to stand in the presence of other humans and not have to explain himself or prove his worth to anyone. The military transport ship that carried him homeward had a crew that included several alien species. The Dacians who served as pilots, the Vexthari who worked in communications, the Corellians who maintained the ship's systems. They all knew who Kevin was. They treated him with respect that went beyond the standard military courtesy. They understood that they were in the presence of someone who had done something extraordinary. Kevin found this attention difficult to accept. He did not see himself as extraordinary. He saw himself as simply human. He had done what his species had learned to do millions of years ago on a dangerous world. He had endured. He had continued. He had refused to break. This was not exceptional for a human. This was normal. But he also understood that for alien species, beings with superior biology and advanced genetics, this kind of endurance was exceptional. They lived in a universe where capability was measured by physical traits and genetic advancement. They had not needed to develop the mental capacity to endure beyond pain and fatigue. They had not needed to learn how to continue when their bodies were screaming in agony. Earth appeared in the viewing screen, a small blue world orbiting an average star in an unimportant section of the galaxy. But to Kevin, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It was home. It was the place where humans had learned to survive against impossible odds. It was the world that had shaped his species and made them into beings that could endure anything. As the ship began its descent toward Earth's atmosphere, Kevin thought about what would happen next. More humans would come to the Galactic Academy. Some of them would fail. Some of them would succeed. But they would all carry with them the knowledge that humanity had a strength that was not measured in terms of muscle or speed or genetic advancement. Humanity had the strength of will. Humanity had the strength of choice. Humanity had the strength that came from surviving on a death world. The ship touched down in a landing facility, and Kevin walked out into Earth's atmosphere. The air felt different than the recycled air of the space station. The wind carried smells that his mind recognized as home. The gravity was familiar. The light from Earth's sun was warm and bright in a way that artificial lights could never replicate. Somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, alien cadets were still discussing the sovereign endurance trial. They were still trying to understand how a human had done something that their own species could not do. They were still learning the lesson that Kevin had taught them without meaning to teach them. The lesson was simple. It was about respect. It was about understanding that strength took many forms. It was about recognizing that a being did not need to be biologically superior to be worthy of admiration. Sometimes the greatest strength came from the smallest, most fragile beings who simply refused to break no matter what the universe threw at them. Kevin walked forward into his home, and behind him, the sun was rising over Earth. On 1,000 worlds across the galaxy, humans were looking up at the stars with a new understanding of their own potential. They were learning that they belonged among the stars. They were learning that their species had a gift that no amount of genetic engineering could replicate. They were learning that humans could endure, and they were only getting started. The age of human insignificance in the galaxy was over. The age of human recognition was beginning. And it had all started with one human who had simply refused to break in a test chamber on Station Kepler 7, who had continued standing when every logical reason said to stop, and who had smiled that small, quiet smile that said he understood something about strength that the rest of the galaxy was only beginning to learn.